Welcome to the new video on my channel. Today we're going to have a look at the absolute basics of selectors in UiPath, and we're going to see how a selector is built up and how we can edit and explore our selectors in UiExplorer. If you like this video, then please subscribe to the channel to be notified when I upload a new video. Enjoy learning and happy automation. Before we get started with the practical example, I would like to explain some general things regarding selectors in UiPath first. So a selector is generally used to uniquely and reliably identify UI elements within applications or websites. And UiPath supports different types of selectors here, for example, Windows selectors, HTML selectors, or web CTRL selectors. But those are basically just different languages that are being used to structure websites or applications. A selector in UiPath consists of several nodes and is structured as follows. We have node 1, node 2, then multiple nodes in between until our last node, node n in this case. And one node within the structure corresponds to one element within the hierarchical GUI structure. And we're going to see what that means in a minute. But for now, it's just important to understand that the lowest node of the hierarchy, meaning in this case node n, represents the desired UI element that we want to interact with. So for example, the button that we want to click or the input field where we want to type text into. And the top node, which is in this case node 1, is also called the root node, and the root node identifies the app or the window that we are interacting with. Each of these nodes contains several attributes which are assigned to a unique value and serve to identify a certain level within the element. So a node is therefore actually structured as follows. We have our node, in this case UI system for example, and we have several attributes. For example, attribute 1 with our attribute value 1 until attribute n with our attribute value n. And typical attributes could be, for example, the name of our element, a URL if we are working with websites, the inner text, which means the text contained in the UI element, for example, the button, or IDs. And if we look at it from a practical perspective, let's say we want to identify the input fields contained in the search bar on Amazon. Then we can already see that we also have a hierarchical structure here. So we have our root node highlighted in orange, which defines the application and the website that we are using here. We have one or multiple nodes in between that, for example, define our search bar here. And we have our target element, which is basically the input field contained in our search bar. So as you can see, the node X, meaning our search bar, also contains the search button and, for example, the filter option on the left, but we are trying to identify the input field. Now, if we want to describe these nodes with selectors, we could, for example, use HTML app MSH here. We have a CSS selector that defines our search bar, and we have a web CTRL ID selector that defines our search box here within the search bar. And if we also add attributes now, we could, for example, add the title or the URL for our root node. In this case, it would be the title of the website. This is important if we have multiple websites opened, for example, so that UiPath knows which website we are interacting with. For our node X, for our body, whatever, we could use the ID, which here is navigation search. And for our target element, we could, for example, use the type of the element, which is called input here. So that makes it clear that we want to identify the input field itself and not any other part of the search bar. Now for the practical example, I've opened the product page in Amazon, and we are going to use UiPath to click the Add to Cart button and then have a detailed look on the selector. So in UiPath, we are using click activity, indicate our target element, and UiPath is automatically going to create a selector for this UI element in the background. And if we want to have a detailed look and also edit our selector, we can use UiExplorer here. So we select open in UiExplorer, and now we get a very detailed view on our selector. So what we can see here below is the selector that UiPath has created for us. And here in the middle, we can see all the different nodes that are in our target elements UI hierarchy. And we can see here on the top, this is our root node. It defines our application with Edge, and it's also using the attributes window name and title. And down here, we have our target element, which is defined by the ID, add to cart button, and the tag input. And all these unselected elements here in between are other nodes in the hierarchy of our target element, but they are not being used here because they are not necessary to identify our target element. So what else we can do in UiExplorer is we can use the validate function to check whether our current selector, for example, if we change something here, or if the page or website changes, is still valid. And we can use the highlight function as well in order to show which UI element is currently targeted by our selector. So the reason why we need to edit these selectors sometimes is, for example, here we can see that on our root node, UiPath is using the title as part of the selector, and the title contains the name of our product here. So that means that if we open another product and validate our selector, the selector is not valid anymore. And this is because we are containing the title here. So if I unselect the title, validate it, we can see that our selector is valid again. And in this case, it's possible because it's the only open web page. But if we have multiple web pages, then we might need to use the title in order to identify our target element. So if the title is selected here, what we could do now is either manually replace parts of the title by wildcards, meaning an asterisk or a question mark, or we could use the repair function here in UiExplorer. Go to the other product again. Yeah, or we could use the repair function here in UiExplorer, which is automatically going to repair our selector. And if I do that, I need to indicate the same UI element. And as you can see, UiPath is automatically going to create a selector that matches both of the selected elements. And as we already know that the title was the problem here, you can see that UiPath replaces parts of the title by a wildcard here and only keeps the static parts of the title, meaning the Amazon.com in the beginning and the books at the end. So this selector is now valid for both product pages. And what else we can do is that we can use variables as part of our selector. So we could select a variable here. I have not defined any variables, but this could, for example, be helpful if we have a list with different links. So we could use the URL as part of our root node, and then we could, for example, read the list, store it in a data table or in a list, and yeah, then just define our variable as attributes in the selector here. And that's it for today's video, and I hope you learned something, and see you soon.